So welcome today to our Ask the Expert, where we are asking questions quite early on. We're still in June, just the general questions about what the dissertation is all about. I'll try and answer as best I can as a new Advanced Higher Dissertation marker, having just marked quite a few a couple of months ago. So first question, Fraser.
Generally, would you say that there are specific hoops you need to jump when writing a dissertation, or is your final mark based more on instinct and what you feel upon first and second reading?
I think the specific hoops you need to jump through, as you call it, is the actual criteria from the SQA, and there's different sections that we have to respond to, your understanding, your analysis, your evaluation. So yes, there's actual criteria that we will show you, and we have to place it in a category. And then within that category, we decide if it's a certain mark. So yes, it's not gut instinct. It is covering all the criteria, the same as you did for higher with your writing folio.
So with it, kind of time management, would you say within the year, are there specific deadlines that we have to meet in terms of progress before the actual final deadline of the dissertation?
So every department sets their own deadlines. So at Banchory Academy, we give you the deadline of having picked your texts by about September time and coming up with your task with your text end of September and writing a proposal so that we know what it is you actually want to focus on. We can then hand that round the different markers in the department, and that also helps us when we go to Aberdeen University Library to get your secondary sources around about October time. We'll also ask you to do a presentation in December based on your secondary sources that you've read. So you'll pick one or two articles by a critic or critics, and you'll talk about what they say about your text. So that'll be December. Then we ask for your first draft in January. I know some schools ask for first drafts earlier, so it just depends on the school, but your final draft needs to be in by the first week back after the Easter holidays. And that's always the date for sending off to the SQA. And it's actually the same day that we send off the higher folios. So it's a similar timescale.
So with secondary criticism, how do you use that, and where does it feature in your argument?
What you'll do is you'll read your primary text first. Mm-hmm. So say you choose two novels, that's what you're starting to read now. You're making your selection, you're choosing them, and you read them once to understand the plot, and then you'll go back and reread. Then when you get your secondary criticism, you will know your novels quite well, or your texts, and you're reading your critics to find out the big ideas. Now you'll be doing this with Miss Greenock when you're studying Hardy or Shakespeare, so you'll actually already know the articles for Hardy and Shakespeare and how we discuss them in the class. When you're doing it on your own, for your own dissertation, you'll have to look through what the critics say, make notes on them, underline them, and then take their key points, their key ideas about techniques or theme, and say whether you agree or disagree with the critics. So you'll cite the critics' names in your dissertation, a bit like what you did for your higher discursive writing, your persuasive essay. So you know how you would cite your sources and you would refer to as one leading MP said or one professor and whatever. So you'll cite the critic, sometimes quote from them or just paraphrase their key idea and then add to that. So see how that fits in with what you're arguing.
So within an essay, would that come in, could you use that as analysis and evaluation, or would you?
Yes, because you're analysing their ideas as well, but you're also evaluating how you agree with what they say to build on your line of argument for your dissertation. Okay. So it's like a step up from critical essay at higher, and obviously the dissertation is longer, but you're going to be bringing in those ideas. A bit like what you did for your Othello essays, but you maybe didn't say, as X said in this article that I read, you just used the ideas. But now you're having to cite where these ideas come from.
Will my marker have read the text I'm writing about, and should we write presuming they have or haven't?
Your marker will have read the majority of them, but there are always ones they won't have read. But if they know nothing about your text, they will have gone on to Spark Notes or find out about it, so they won't be coming in cold. If it's poetry, as a marker, I would have the poems in front of me. I would access them, but there were some that I marked that no, I hadn't read the text, but I had gained a plot summary of it. And these are very experienced English teachers who have marked lots of essays over the years, so they will have an understanding of it. But there's always a rogue text we've never heard of that we can tell if you understood it from the way you talk about it, and we have an idea of the plot. But we will even go onto Wikipedia to find out what it's about. So yes, you write knowing that your marker knows your text, but you want to enlighten them with your understanding of a text that you assume they know.
How do you go about beginning to structure this dissertation? Do you start with your own information about the book? How do you use your secondary sources and put it all together to make a smooth dissertation?
So what we always do is ask you to do, maybe after the proposal, do a 2 sides of A4 plan, and then I would recommend you do a much more detailed plan after you've made all your copious notes from your primary texts, your 2 novels or your 6 poems or your 2 plays, and then your notes from your secondary sources. So you're going to have a folder worth of notes that you've made, and then you're going to have to extract from them and write a big plan, but really you're focusing on your line of argument. So you're actually going to have to use numbers maybe and decide that goes there and that goes there. So some people like to section off their dissertation into stages and use subheadings. I wouldn't recommend you write the subheading in the dissertation, but often at the planning stage you section it off.
Should you give your own personal opinion on the book in the dissertation?
Well, it's similar to what you did at Higher. So you wouldn't really say, I love the book, I'd give it 9 out of 10.
Yeah. So would you give your opinion, not like, oh, it was a great book, but more like what you how you interpret the book?
Yes, yeah. So it's what you believe your writer's trying to do and what they're trying, the big idea, what they're trying to say connected to the theme. And obviously that would be tied in with your task, because you're not trying to cover all the ideas in the text because you don't have time for that. You're narrowing your focus to what you've decided in your task. But that's something you work on with your tutor who is helping you come up with your task.
With the dissertation, is it just all under one essay, or is it divided in any other ways? Because I know in other subjects they've got more, because it's so big, it's more of a divided kind of thing. Is it just the same as like a higher essay but bigger?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I think you're meaning what in social subjects maybe you have it into sections of different.
We'd have like separate essay questions within one dissertation.
Yeah, so no, you're not dividing it into separate questions. You have one key task, which is like a question, and that's what you're arguing. So it is just a really extended critical essay.
Okay.
So proportionally, would you say compared to how much of the dissertation is made up of actual your own notes that you've made yourself from reading the primary text, compared to how much is kind of you comparing and contrasting views from secondary kind of sources?
Okay, there's no set rule, but I would say the dissertations that do better are the ones that have more on secondary sources. But you obviously don't want more on secondary sources than your primary texts, so you want a balance of maybe half and half, but you're going to merge the two together, so it's hard to say like fractions or decimal points, but you really want to be having as much on secondary sources as on your primary ones. Okay. If you can, it all depends if there's secondary sources available.
I know the primary way people write these dissertations is through analysing 2 novels, and I know some people analyse 1 novel, but are there any alternatives too? For example, 3 novels, or would you be stretching yourself too thinly?
I think you'd be stretching yourself too thinly with 3 novels. So now it tends to be 2 novels is the common choice, but 1 novel with a good task, with a sort of meaty novel, a novel that has enough in it is certainly fine. Poetry, you can do 4, 5, 6 poems dependent on the length type of poems, but you may have 1 real extended poem, so you could just look at T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Plays, you could, again, 2 plays or 1 play, so it really depends on your task and your text, your choice of text.
Sure.
Obviously, certain novels have obvious themes that you could write about, but how compared to picking that theme and picking an alternative theme that's slightly different, with the marking, is it going to get better if you use the usual one, or would your controversial point of view or theme choice of that those novels make a different effect?
So I know what you're saying. So your mark's not going to be because it's more unusual, the ideas, than previously. However, if you take an angle that hasn't been done to death and an angle that the marker thinks, oh, I haven't read that before, that's really insightful, then that's going to get you up the marks in being perceptive and insightful in your understanding. So you really do want to try and go for something that's a bit different, but also keep it narrow and not try and cover too much. Because I know you think it's a lot of words, but actually the narrower the focus, the more specific you'll be in your line of argument.
Do you think it's better if we kind of spend an equal amount of time each week until we meet the deadline, or if we do a little bit less work in kind of September, October, November, and then work a lot more each week?
Well, see, that's your time management, because you've got to juggle 3 advanced hires perhaps, or 1 advanced hire and 3 hires. So I think the more you can do now, the better. We've had someone a couple of years ago who did really well because they pretty much nailed it in December with their presentation on their secondary sources, and that was their dissertation. The last minuters, it's more tricky. And sometimes we're asking you after first draft saying it's not working to rewrite it and start again. And that can be hard if you've just come up with those ideas. So I would be starting now having lots of notes, copious notes from your primary and secondary sources, so that when it comes to us changing tasks or looking at what you're actually proving, you can go back to other notes and think, okay, I'll use that instead of what I said earlier.
So if we were to start now, how much time would you say roughly each week would be the ideal amount of time to spend on it?
2 hours a week maybe, 2-3 hours a week. But that's reading time, because the more you read, the more you're going to be able to make your selection. There's always the person who says, I've only read this novel by September, and give me something to go with it. And that's the person who hasn't thought about studying in such detail, whereas the person who has read 6 novels, a couple of short stories and poetry, and you say, right, what's the one you're really excited about that you want to go back and reread and think about, then it's better for them to pick that one. So now you might do a lot of reading now, which actually you might ditch because you go for something else, but that's all part of the process. And you're reading towards what you do at uni next year.